Let me bring in Hussain, a research fellow at the FDD. Thank you very much for being with us, Hussain. So I'll put it to you as well. Antony Blinken's here. His message: contain the war and grant the Palestinians a path to statehood. How is this message being digested across the region, do you think?
Well, I don't think there's anything new in this message. I think this is actually where we stopped before October 7. This was probably the last statement that came out of the Saudis when they were talking to Israel through the U.S., of course, that if you provide Palestinians a path for a state, and here we're not talking about a state itself, just a path for a state, and some arrangement that improves the lives of Palestinians, and that means that the Saudis will go forward with peace and normalization. So I don't see Blinken's message now different from where we stopped. The reason or the timing of his message, I think, like you've been discussing in the studio, it's mainly addressing domestic U.S. audiences, all the senators on what we call the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, Chris Murphy, Chris Van Hollen, and these guys.
Well, what about the comments, Hussain, by the Saudi ambassador to the UK? He has told the BBC that normalisation is still on the cards, but there will be no normalisation without a Palestinian state. And if we cast our minds back to prior to October 7th, he was talking about, the Crown Prince, was talking about improving the lives of Palestinians. There wasn't so much talk about a Palestinian state. You see that that's changed?
No, I think that the Saudis understand that it needs two to tango, and that Israel on its own cannot provide the Palestinians with a state. The Palestinians have a lot of heavy lifting to do before we can talk about a state. I think the Saudis understand this, and because they do, they've been saying, okay, let's just say a path toward a state. Let's just say that the ground is ready for a state, but from there on, it'll be incumbent on Palestinians to construct the state. So I don't see the Saudis going beyond this point, and I think they're still interested in the same policy that we heard from Crown Prince MBS right before October 7th.
All right, stay with us, Hussain. Michael Oren, I mean, is this a case of history repeating itself? We're talking about a path to Palestinian statehood. Sounds a lot like the Oslo Accords that, of course, never went anywhere.
No, I think it's a step down from the 2002 Saudi peace plan, which actually called for a Palestinian state based on the 67 borders, redivision of Jerusalem. The Saudis have, I think, backed away a bit. They're saying they're looking for a pathway. Sometimes we refer to it as a horizon. Let's have a diplomatic horizon. Now, I see no downside to Israel providing a diplomatic horizon. Nothing at this point sort of obligates us in that way. And we're talking about a highly theoretical position, which, if we can say something, might help the Biden administration with its domestic opponents and help some of our allies in the region with their domestic public opinion, it wouldn't cost us anything and would not obligate us in the future.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Yes, we are hearing the voices inside Israel against what Blinken brings with him. And of course, some of those who are not part of the war cabinet do allow themselves to speak more freely than others. We heard from National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir today. He went to X or Twitter, calling on Blinken. This is not a time to speak softly, but to Hamas, but rather time to use that big stick. Obviously a reference to the late Theodore Roosevelt that said, speak softly and carry a big stick, you will go far. Whatever that stick may be, I don't think Blinken is ready to use that, not on Hamas, perhaps on Israel if it doesn't follow what the US wants to do right now.
Not quite. Abdul Hussain, I mean, the Biden administration has made it clear from the beginning they want to contain this war. It is already expanding, though, isn't it, via Iranian proxies from Yemen to Lebanon, to Iraq. Is Washington just being outplayed by Tehran at this stage?
Well, outplayed might be one way of describing it, but we have seen a trend with this administration in that they say things and they do the opposite. And this is independent of what Israel and Hamas are doing right now. They took the Houthis off of the terrorism list, and now they formed a coalition against the Houthis. They tried to talk to Iran, and then they strike Iranian militias in Iraq. So almost for every position that the Biden administration has taken, you can find something to the contrary that they did on the ground in terms of military or other kinds of action. So I'm not sure which part of the statement of Blinken or other U.S. officials is addressed to domestic audience in the U.S. or whether this is addressing someone in the region, Iran perhaps, or somebody else, or even U.S. allies. But what I know is that they've been all over the place. There's no strategy. The only strategy that they had until very recently was de-escalation. And that's not really a strategy because it just fell apart on one day after October 7. So I think the Biden administration desperately needs a strategy with or without election coming.
All right, thank you, Hussain. Michael Oren.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, you're nodding
That was
your
really
head
excellent.
there.
Thank you.
And is Israel paying the price?
Well,
Israel is paying the price?
people have asked me over the years, what is America's policy here in the Middle East? And I have a very hard time charting because it's kind of zigzags over the place. I can take it, sort of riff even further on what was said here. That for years they didn't invite Netanyahu to the White House, and then all of a sudden they were courting Netanyahu to make the Saudi deal. They were dissing the Saudis and then shaking the hands of the Saudis. It's back and forth, and it can be very confusing. In this war, too, the administration has been speaking in two voices, being highly critical of Israel in the way we were conducting the war, but at the same time providing us vital ammunition and casting vetoes in the Security Council. But in many ways, the vetoes, the Security Council resolutions are a product of America's criticism of Israel and claiming that we are bombing indiscriminately. And even this case in The Hague has some roots in America's criticism of the way we're conducting the war. So it is a very difficult chart. It would be intensely helpful if the America actually had a consistent policy, and if I had my druthers, that would be we shouldn't be afraid. We, the United States, shouldn't be afraid of regional conflagration. Iran, Russia, and China should be afraid. And we're going to stick by Israel. We understand this is a complex moral challenge in Gaza, but we're sticking by our Israeli allies through thick and thin.
All right, thank you, Michael. If we could just turn our attentions to the north for a moment, Hussain, we've got an escalation with Hezbollah. 2 senior Hezbollah commanders wiped out in the last couple of days. The assassination in Beirut last week, and now you've got Lebanese officials, both the caretaker Prime Minister Mikati and the Foreign Minister, kind of begging the UN to do something. Let's have a diplomatic solution. Does that show how concerned they are right now in Beirut?
Well, I think there is concern, but I think that at the same time, the world and especially Washington are not taking Israeli concerns into consideration. I think of all the issues, of all the sticking issues between Israel and the Palestinians and between Israel and other Arabs, this is the most slam dunk case in favor of Israel. You have an international border recognized between both sides, and then Hezbollah starts a war. And now Israel is asked to rein in itself. So I don't think any country can live with that. There are no sticking issues between both sides. 1701 must be implemented. The UN should have been stepping up to implement 1701 to prevent this war from breaking. But the UN is not doing anything, and the international community is not doing anything. And this leaves Israel with no option but to go itself and enforce 1701. Now, we hope it doesn't go that far, but if the world doesn't do anything to rein in Hezbollah and enforce 1701, I think war might be inevitable.
Okay, thank you, Hussain. Michael.
Just to say, the 1701, even if it was implemented, is not going to change the situation very much on the ground. Removing Hezbollah from the northern border beyond the Litani River may complicate a Hezbollah ground attack against Israel. There have been reports of the discovery of additional Hezbollah tunnels leading under the Israeli border. But for the 150,000 rockets, that distance is not going to mean anything. So it's not the matter of distance. It's not even a matter of 1701. It's the fact that you have an army on Israel's northern border that's committed to Israel's destruction, backed by Iran, and Iran in turn backed by Russia and China. That is the nature of the existential danger. It's a strategic danger. Hamas is a tactical danger. Hezbollah is a strategic danger that Israel simply cannot ignore. And I understand why the United States doesn't want to have a regional conflagration, but our existence is at stake here. And we must have to say to the United States, thank you for your support, but but we want to survive.
And Guy, does this go back in part to that maritime border agreement, in inverted commas, between the previous Israeli government and a Lebanese government, including Hezbollah? Because it kind of legitimized.
There's a lot of talk about the question of deterrence, and yes, we did hear from the previous Prime Minister Yair Lapid saying that maritime agreement with Hezbollah would drift Hezbollah further away from conflict. We see there's no such thing whatsoever. But more generally speaking about deterrence, that is much more complicated when you're talking about a terrorist group like Hezbollah or like Hamas. We saw very well in the case of Hamas that the good of the people of Gaza is not something that they even consider, that they knew very well what would be the Israeli reaction to what they have done. And we see the same with Hezbollah in the north. Are not deterred, but we should say one thing, and that is the fact that while the threat of Hezbollah is still as serious as the ambassador described here, Israel is striking Hezbollah with much greater force over the past several days. We saw those couple of very high-profile assassinations today and yesterday as well. For 17 years, Israel has avoided targeting Hezbollah operatives, even when they did operate, even in Syria, attempting to only hurt Iranian proxies, but not Hezbollah. That has changed dramatically over the past several weeks, and we're seeing the damage that is being caused to Hezbollah during these days. Obviously, that is not enough to prevent the immense damage that will be caused should a war start between Israel and Hezbollah.
All right, thank you, Guy. And Hussain, we've spoken a lot about Iran and their role in all of this, but what about Qatar? Qatar, close US ally, it funded, it backed, it hosts Hamas. Is it due a reckoning, do you think?
Absolutely. I think here in Washington, we should discuss Qatar more. We should revise our position with Qatar. No U.S. allies in the history of alliances with the U.S. has behaved the same way that Qatar has been behaving. I'm one of the people who have Al Jazeera Arabic running on in the background all the day, and it's beyond instigation. It's beyond anti-Semitism. It's beyond being the mouthpiece of Hamas and of Islamic Jihad. So I think it's not a healthy relationship that we have with Qatar. If we're allies, then we should be able to have a candid and frank conversation about these issues. Now, I know all the talking points in defense of Al Jazeera that Qatar might have, pretending that Al Jazeera is an independent organization, which we know is not. But whatever the case is, I think we have a long list of grievances. Not only Israeli grievances with Qatar, even the United States has a long list of grievances with Qatar. Allies don't behave this way between each other.
Abdul Hussain at the FDD, thank you very much.
Thank you.